Hello, everyone. Hey, our company is going to start requiring that you have a vaccine before you can go to work or go back to work. We'll get into that in just a second. But first, please share this or like this video so that YouTube will share it with other people, because there's probably a lot of people out there that may have these same questions about whether their company is going to require vaccines or not. So anyhow, let's get started. In a article a couple days ago from CNBC entitled "Most U.S. Companies Will Require Proof of COVID Vaccination from Employees," there was a survey done by Arizona State University and with support of the Rockefeller Foundation. And what it found was a broad majority of U.S. employers, 65%, plan to offer employees incentives to get vaccinated, and 63% will require proof of vaccination, according to the survey. And overall, it said 44% will require all employees to get vaccinated, 31% will just encourage vaccinations, and 14% will require some employees to get vaccinated. So that's a big question. If your company is going to start requiring you to get vaccinated and you don't believe in the vaccination, or you don't want to get the vaccination, can they make you do that? It said when it comes to the consequences for failing to comply with the company vaccination policy, 42% of the businesses said that the employee will not be allowed to return to the physical work environment, and 35% said disciplinary actions are on the table, up to and including possible termination. Could that be where we are now, where a company can require that you get a vaccination, and if you choose not to get the vaccination, they actually can fire you? I don't think that's right. That kind of really goes against our freedom of choice to be able to decide what we do with our own bodies. I mean, we've heard this before, my body, my choice. So I think that would fall, right in line with getting vaccinations, whether you want to get a vaccination or not. It says the survey released Thursday represents responses from 957 facilities across 24 industry sectors in the U.S. Most other respondents were businesses with 250 or more employees. Now, most of the responses, if there's only 957, I would say would probably be at least half. 957 responses isn't really that big an amount of companies to being surveyed. So I have a little chart here that I'll show you that kind of shows you the number of employers or businesses that have over 250. And if you add those numbers up, it's about 78,000 companies that have over 250 employees. And with the size of the sample, that's about a 0.012 sampling of the companies. That's a pretty small sampling to make the kind of statement that there's going to be like at least 65% of the companies are going to make you have vaccines before you can return to work. 957 out of 78,000. That's pretty tiny. That's a pretty tiny response, and we don't even know what the questions were, so it's hard to say exactly what kind of response you would get based on how the questions were worded. But still, it says that looking forward, 66% of employers are planning to allow employees to work from home full-time through 2021, and 73% intend to offer flexible work arrangements when the pandemic is over. However, 73% of the businesses want employees to work from home office at least 20 hours a week. So they don't want them all to come back and try to have this hybrid environment. I think the thing to also remember is that it's that question of being forced to take a vaccine that you may or may not want. But in another article, which is kind of interesting, this is from Stat magazine, or Stat, which is a medical focused sort of e-zine. It talks about the authorization status is a red herring when it comes to mandating COVID vaccine. And what they're talking about is that there's wording in the usage of vaccines that are under the EUA, which is an emergency use authorization. Emergency use authorization is it's not to say that the vaccine hasn't been tested. It's just that generally it takes a couple years for vaccines to be tested and then to be given a license to be used freely and approved by the FDA. The FDA has not approved these vaccines yet. They've approved them only for emergency use authorization. And what that means is that it could still be 2 years away with more testing just to make sure that, or just to be able to have their regular license to use that vaccine regularly and not under a normal situation and not just under emergency use authorization. But the one thing that they talk about in here is it says there's important nuances lead us to very important different conclusions. There are no legal barriers to employers or schools requiring vaccines distributed under EUAs, which means that there's nothing that says they can't do it. There's nothing that says they can't make you. But also under the EUA guidelines, there is language that talks about requiring the Secretary of Health and Human Services to ensure that people know that they can refuse or accept the vaccine. The same language requires the informational materials accompanying the EUA vaccines to tell people that it is your choice to receive the relevant vaccine. Meaning, what they're saying here is that the wordage, by saying that you have the choice to refuse or to take, implies that it can't be mandatory, because if it was mandatory, you would not be able to refuse it. So that's one of the sides of the argument, is that people are saying, well, under the EUA, there's wordage that makes it so they can't require you to have a vaccine in order to go back to work or to go to school. Even colleges who are doing it, there's nothing that says they can't do it, but there's also wordage that says you have to be given the option to not take it if you choose to. It's your choice. The policy against mandates is that the standard for emergency use authorizations are lower than the standards for full approval. That the vaccines are experimental and not enough is known about them, and it is therefore unfair to mandate them. There's already been two lawsuits have been filed, making both the legal and the policy arguments. One by the officers in New Mexico and one by Los Angeles United School District. There's a reason to reject both these arguments. So, on legal side, the EUA statute says nothing directed at employees or universities. Instead, it addresses the actions of federal officials such as HSS Secretary and the President, not the private sectors. The private employees are generally at will, meaning, most states are at will employment, meaning you're there at your will, and you're there at the will of the company. So it means meaning they can be terminated for any reason that is not explicitly illegal. In one way, what they're saying is that it goes back to that, where some number of the companies were saying that they could, if you didn't take the vaccine, could be terminated. There's nothing that says illegal for them to do that. It still goes back to the documentation that you have to be given the choice to take the vaccine, simply because under is a EUA, they are considered experimental, and not until they get their full license would they be considered a normal vaccine. There's a broad prohibition covering all employees and universities in the U.S. that is not in fact in the statute. So there's a lot of the a wide range of what people think they can do and can't do. We'll have to see what comes of those lawsuits that are out there already. But I think that in the coming months, we're probably going to see more pressure on employees from employers, depending upon where the number of people getting vaccinated stops. I think there's already some slowdown in the number of people who are getting the vaccine, and so as we go further into the year, and they find that the number of people getting it has really dropped off, they may start getting some pressure to make people get it. I hope that doesn't happen. I mean, I think that it would be a bad thing to start mandating vaccine and people get it, and you have to get it or you can't work. That's in tyranny in a way, because they start making things like that mandatory. Then the next thing that comes along, they can make that one mandatory, and then pretty soon you don't have no choice at all. You have to get a vaccine, or you have to get something just in order to be part of society and live in a society as just a regular person. So we'll have to see. The thing goes on to say that before the pandemic, the general position of the relevant federal agencies, such as the Food and Drug Administration and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, was that vaccines provided under emergency use authorization cannot be mandated. But that guidance was not binding, meaning, that was what they thought. That's what those organizations thought, that it shouldn't be required. But there wasn't no weight behind it. No one said that, there was, what they said did not make it that way. It's just that was their position, and that was their guidance, that it shouldn't be mandatory. When confronted with pandemic realities, the federal government took the position that, whether an employer may require or mandate COVID-19 vaccination is a matter of state or other applicable law. Legally, there's nothing to prevent such a reasonable position shift. Yeah, there's nothing legal that mandates that, but there's also nothing that specifically says you can. So I think we're going to find out over the next couple of months what this is really, how effective these are really going to be, and at what level the companies are willing to, let employees make the decision on whether they want to have that vaccine or not. We'll see. This is going to be an interesting few months to see what happens with this. So anyhow, I'm going to leave it right there. I'll see how this plays out. Before I go, again, once if you don't mind, like the video if you liked it, and if you didn't like it, you can not like it. You can dislike it also. And remember, and if you didn't like what I said, then subscribe so you can hear more of what you didn't want to hear. Anyhow, well, that's it. Have a good day. We'll see ya.